Welcome to Damon Revenge Stories. Get ready for tales of sweet revenge.
My name is Marcus Pemberton. I am 44 years old. On a Tuesday morning in late October, I sat in the Dougherty County Tax Office on Pine Avenue in Albany, Georgia, and I watched a clerk with reading glasses on a beaded chain pick up a rubber stamp, press it into red ink, and bring it down 14 times across 14 property transfer documents that bore my dead brother's signature, except my brother didn't sign them. My brother had been in the ground for 2 years. The clerk set down her stamp and looked at me over her glasses and said, "Sir, how long has this woman lived with you?" And I opened my mouth to answer, but what came out was a sound I had never made before, something between a laugh and a breath knocked loose from the chest, because the answer was 731 days. And every single one of them had been a lie. What I'm about to tell you is how I found out, what I did about it, and what it cost me to sit across from someone I had fed and sheltered and trusted while she systematically dismantled everything my brother left behind and then came for what was mine. Before I get into the rest of this, I want to say, welcome back to this channel. The stories we share here are about real people who faced situations that tested everything they believed about loyalty, family, and trust. If you have ever let someone into your home because grief made you generous and then wondered why your life started falling apart, this one is going to sit with you. Drop a comment below and tell me where you are listening from. Hit subscribe if you have not already, because what happened next in my kitchen is something I still cannot believe I lived through. To understand how I got there, you have to go back to the summer my brother died. Ronald Pemberton was 49 years old when a stroke took him on a Sunday afternoon in July. He was sitting in a lawn chair in his backyard in Leesburg, Georgia, watching his 2 kids run through the sprinkler, and his wife Vivian was inside making lemonade. And by the time she came out with the pitcher, he was slumped sideways, and his left hand was trailing in the grass. The paramedics said he was gone before they arrived. That is the story Vivian told at the hospital, and I have no reason to doubt that part of it, because I was the one who got the call, and I was the one who drove 70 miles in 50 minutes, and I was the one who walked into the emergency room and saw my brother's body under a sheet and felt the floor tilt beneath me like someone had pulled a lever. Ronald was my older brother by 5 years. He was the one who taught me to drive a stick shift in the church parking lot. He was the one who co-signed my first apartment lease when I was 20 and had no credit history. He was the kind of man who did things quietly. He never told you he was handling something. You just noticed later that it had been handled. He worked in agricultural supply sales, drove a territory across South Georgia, and I always assumed he made a decent but unremarkable living. He never talked about money. Vivian never talked about money either, except to say they were comfortable, which in our family meant you paid your bills on time and you did not ask anyone for help. I had been a long-haul freight dispatcher out of Albany for 16 years by then. My job is tracking loads. Every manifest, every bill of lading, every timestamp, every discrepancy between what was supposed to be on a truck and what actually was. I sit in a chair with 3 screens and I reconcile numbers all day. I notice when things do not match. That is what I do. That is what I have always done. But grief, I learned, is a kind of fog that turns off the part of your brain that notices discrepancies. Grief makes you careless. And Vivian knew that before I did. My daughter Kayla was 17 when Ronald died. She was the center of my world. Her mother had left when Kayla was 3, and I'd raised her alone, me, and a rotating cast of babysitters, and my mother, until she passed. And then just me, and the dispatcher schedule, and the public school system of Albany, Georgia. Kayla was sharp. She had her mother's face, and my stubbornness, and a way of looking at people that made them uncomfortable if they were not telling the truth. I should have listened to Kayla sooner. That is one of the things that sits with me now. The day after the funeral, Vivian sat on my couch with her 2 children, Jalen, who was 11, and Amara, who was 8, and she told me Ronald had left nothing. Worse than nothing. She said He had debts she was still discovering. She said the house in Leesburg was mortgaged to the roof, and the car had a lien, and the savings account was empty. She cried while she said it. She was very good at crying. The tears came easily, and her voice cracked in the right places, and her hands shook just enough to make you want to reach out and steady them. I know this now because I watched her do it dozens of times over the next 2 years, and the technique never varied. She had practiced the way an actress practices. I made a promise to my brother. I made it in the hospital, standing next to his body, with the sheet pulled down to his chest, and his face looking like he had just fallen asleep in the lawn chair and not yet woken up. I told him I would take care of his kids. I meant it. I meant it with everything I had. So, I emptied my 401k, $41,000 plus the early withdrawal penalty, which brought the net down to about $33,000. I paid for the funeral. I paid for the casket Vivian picked out, the one with the brushed bronze handles that cost $4,000 more than the next one down. I paid for the repast. I paid for flowers. I paid for the headstone. And when Vivian said she could not afford to keep the house in Leesburg and she had nowhere to go, I told her she and the kids could stay with me. My 3-bedroom house on Willowbrook Drive was not large, but Kayla could share her room with Amara, and Jalen could take the den, and Vivian could have the spare room, and we would figure it out. I told her it was temporary. That word, temporary. She used it more than I did. She said it every time someone asked. She said it at church. She said it at school functions. Temporary, she would say, until I get back on my feet. She was so humble about it, so grateful. She brought me coffee in the morning those first weeks. She cooked dinner. She organized the hall closet. She made herself indispensable in the way a person does when they want you to stop imagining the house without them. Within the first month, she offered to take over the household finances. She said it gently. She said, "Marcus, you work 60-hour weeks dispatching freight. You come home exhausted. Let me handle the bills and the mail and the groceries, and you just focus on keeping the roof over our heads." It made sense. It made beautiful, practical sense. And I said yes because I was tired and sad, and the 401k was gone, and I could not remember the last time someone had offered to carry something for me. She redirected my mail to a P.O. box. She said it was easier to have everything go to one place. She handled it. She handled all of it. And I let her because I was grieving, and because I had made a promise, and because Vivian cried at every family dinner, and I thought it was because she missed Ronald. She did not miss Ronald. She was counting. The first crack appeared about 6 months in. I checked my credit score on a whim, one of those free monitoring apps that sends you alerts, and it had dropped 60 points. I was at 740 before Ronald died. Now I was at 680 and falling. I showed Vivian the screen, and she barely looked at it. "That is the funeral expenses catching up," she said. "All those charges, the credit card you used for the flowers. It takes a while to cycle through the bureaus." She said it with the same steady voice she used for everything. And I nodded, because it sounded right, and because I wanted it to be right, and because doubting her would mean doubting the structure that was holding my household together. 3 weeks later, I would understand why she needed my truck title. But that Wednesday, I just signed it. She brought the paper to me at the kitchen table. She was crying again. She said she felt unsafe not having transportation she could use for the children. "Within wasabamber were moksa mia so and why? Well, like I was on a courser on a dispatch shift, and she needed to take Jalen to the doctor. She said adding her name to the title was just for insurance purposes. She had a pen in her hand already. I signed it. Kayla was in the hallway, and I heard her footsteps stop. And I know now she was listening. And I know now she wanted to say something. But she was 17. And it was not her place. And we both paid for that silence later. The cracks multiplied. Small ones. Dismissible alone. Vivian started getting packages delivered to the P.O. box. She said they were things for the kids. school supplies, clothes. But Jalen wore the same 3 shirts on rotation, and Amar's shoes were wearing through the toe. I noticed that in the way you notice something you do not want to examine. A peripheral awareness that you actively push away, because examining it would mean the thing you built is unstable. My sleep changed. I started waking at 3 a.m. for no reason. Heart hammering, sweat on my chest, and I would lie there in the dark and listen to the house and hear nothing and tell myself nothing was wrong. But the body knows. The body is an instrument that picks up frequencies. The conscious mind refuses to tune in. My jaw was clenching in my sleep. I cracked a molar. My dentist asked if I was under unusual stress, and I said no, and I believed it. Kayla told me Vivian had been saying things at school pickup, that Marcus drinks too much, that she was basically the real parent now, that Marcus means well, but he is overwhelmed. Kayla told me this with the same flat expression she wore when she was furious, which was the same expression her mother had worn, and I should have recognized it as a warning. I confronted Vivian. Vivian cried. She said Kayla was jealous of the attention the younger kids got. She said Kayla had always been territorial. She said it was natural, a teenage girl adjusting to sharing her father. And I believed it. I chose Vivian's tears over my daughter's testimony, and that is the thing I carry now. The thing that wakes me up at 3 a.m, even though the house is quiet and the fog is lifted. Then the mail came, not to the P.O. box, to the house. A property tax notice forwarded by accident, some clerical error in the county system that sent it to the physical address instead of the redirect. It was for a rental property in Leesburg, in Ronald's name, a 3-unit property on Dawson Road that had been generating rental income for 23 months. 23 months during which Vivian had been sitting at my kitchen table telling me the family had nothing. I held that envelope standing at the mailbox on a Thursday afternoon in March. The sun was warm. The street was quiet. A dog was barking 3 houses down. And my hands recognized the handwriting on the forwarding label before my brain did. It was not Ronald's. It was Vivian's. She had written the redirect address herself. I did not confront her. Something in me shifted. The way a freight car uncouples from the engine, a clean mechanical separation, and the part of me that had been grieving and trusting and believing, disconnected from the part of me that tracks loads and reconciles, manifests, and notices when the numbers do not match. I stood at the mailbox and I felt the second version of myself come online. The dispatcher, the man who finds discrepancies. I put the envelope inside my truck, under the floor mat on the passenger side, and I walked inside and I smiled at Vivian. And I said, "What is for dinner?" And she said, "Pork chops." And I said, "That sounds good." And I sat down at the table and I ate with her and the kids. And I tasted nothing. Absolutely nothing. My mouth was mechanical. My jaw was a hinge. And the whole time she was talking about something Amara had done at school. Something funny. And she was laughing. And I watched her laugh and I thought, "You have been collecting rent on my brother's property for almost 2 years. While I emptied my retirement to bury him, and you sat at this table and you laughed like this every night." The next morning I drove to the Dougherty County Courthouse before my shift. I pulled property records for Ronald Pemberton. What I found stopped me in the hallway. 3 properties. Not 1, 3. 2 residential rentals in Leesburg and a small commercial lot in Dawson. All in Ronald's name. All actively generating income. Total assessed value across the 3. Just over $310,000. My brother, the man Vivian told me died broke, had been building a quiet real estate portfolio for a decade. And Vivian had known. She had not only known, she had been managing it since his death, collecting rents, filing paperwork, and telling me there was nothing. I sat in my truck in the courthouse parking lot, and I could not open my mouth. My jaw locked so tight. Driving home, I could not open my mouth for 10 minutes. I pulled into the pilot station on Oglethorpe, and I sat there with the engine running, and I pressed my fingers into my jaw muscles until they released. And then I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I did not call Vivian. I did not go home. I drove to Leesburg and I parked across the street from the rental property on Dawson Road, and I watched a tenant come out and check his mailbox and go back inside. My brother's building, my brother's investment, Vivian's income. That night I started the dossier. I know that word sounds formal, like something from a spy movie, but it is the only word that fits what I built over the next 7 weeks. I am a freight dispatcher. I track things. I reconcile documents. I find where the numbers go wrong. And I applied every skill I had ever used to find a missing pallet of lumber in a Phoenix warehouse, to finding what Vivian had done with my brother's estate. I started with the county records, property transfers, tax filings, deed modifications. I photographed everything. I requested certified copies, and that is when I found the first forged signature. A property transfer document moving one of Ronald's Leesburg rentals into a trust with Vivian as sole beneficiary. Signed by Ronald Pemberton, dated 4 months after Ronald died. My hands recognized the handwriting before my brain did. It was not Ronald's. I had seen my brother sign his name 1,000 times on birthday cards, on the co-signed lease, on the hospital admission form the day our mother went into hospice. This was close but wrong. The R was too narrow. The loop on the P was forced. Someone had practiced the signature. Someone had gotten good at it, but not good enough. I found 13 more. 14 documents total, all bearing Ronald's forged signature, all filed after his death, all transferring assets, modifying beneficiaries, redirecting accounts, a systematic, organized dismantling of everything Ronald had built, conducted by the Momotesa error, Wansam Puamsa error, Yasserau Prepam, Any Versan or error, Shura per. Soargir, Resinpri, Payamda. I needed help, not emotional help. I needed someone who could read a tax return the way I read a bill of lading. My coworker at the freight company, a man named Dale Perkins, had been an auditor before he burned out, and took the dispatcher job for the lower stress and the steady hours. Dale was 61 years old, and he wore the same khaki pants every day, and he did not talk much, and he was the most meticulous person I had ever met. I asked him to look at what I had gathered. I brought the documents to the break room on a Saturday when the office was empty. I spread them across the table. Dale went white, not slowly, all at once, like someone had pulled a plug. He sat down, and he put on his reading glasses, and he did not look up for 40 minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat. Marcus, she has been filing tax returns in your brother's name since he died. He said it the way you say the temperature outside. Just a fact. And then he said the part that changed everything. And she listed you as a dependent to claim your income. She has been filing in Ronald's name with you as a dependent. Your tax identity is compromised. The contamination reaches you. What the auditor found on the second page changed everything I thought I knew about my brother's death. Not the death itself. The stroke was real. The medical records confirmed it. But the story of what came after. Ronald did not die broke. Ronald died careful. Ronald died the way he lived, quietly, with things handled. He had the rental properties. He had an investment account I never knew about. He had a life insurance policy with a payout of $80,000. He had set up his children's futures, and Vivian had taken every piece of it and convinced me, convinced the family, convinced everyone that there was nothing, that Ronald left only debt, that the funeral was a burden I had to carry alone. I buried my brother with my retirement money, and she watched me do it, knowing he left $310,000 she had already moved into her name. I said that out loud at 2 a.m, in my kitchen, with the dossier spread across the table, and the house dark and silent around me. I said it to no one. I said it to my brother's ghost, maybe, if such things exist. I said it to the version of myself who had believed her. The dossier grew. I hired a forensic accountant out of Macon, a man named Arthur Phelps, who charged $200 an hour and was worth every dollar. I drove to Macon and sat across from him in a diner, and he looked at what I had assembled, and he said, without emotion, "Mr. Pemberton, your brother didn't die broke. She made him look broke, and then she made you pay for the funeral." He said it like a diagnosis, like reading a scan, and I sat there with my coffee getting cold, and I felt something click into place, a gear engaging, the last coupling on the train, and everything I had been feeling for weeks, the rage and the grief and the disorientation, all of it compressed into a single point of purpose. Arthur found more. He found the investment account Ronald had maintained through a brokerage in Atlanta, an account with a balance of $67,000 at the time of Ronald's death, an account that Vivian had liquidated using forged authorization within 3 months of the funeral. He found the life insurance payout, $80,000, deposited into an account in Vivian's maiden name at a bank in Savannah. He found rental income totaling just over $43,000, collected across 23 months. He found it all. And I paid him with money I did not have because the alternative was letting her keep it. If you are listening to this, and you are starting to feel something tighten in your chest, if this story is hitting a nerve you were not expecting, I need you to stay with me. Because what happened next at my own kitchen table is something I still replay in my mind at least once a week. Hit subscribe and stay until the end. The masquerade. That is the word for what I lived through for the next 4 weeks, while the dossier reached completion. 4 weeks of sitting across from Vivian at dinner. 4 weeks of handing her my paycheck. 4 weeks of watching her smile and cook and cry at family dinners and tuck in the kids and tell me she was grateful and call me family and all of it. Every word and every gesture landing on my skin like something toxic that I could not wipe off because she would see me flinching. The first night of the masquerade, I came home and Vivian had made pot roast. She was in the kitchen and the house smelled like onions and bay leaf. And she turned around and smiled and said, "Hard day." And I said, "Always." And I sat down and she put a plate in front of me and I picked up my fork and I chewed and I swallowed and I could not taste a thing. My body was running on cortisol and adrenaline and the food was just texture, just something to move through my mouth while I looked at the woman across from me and cataloged everything she said for inconsistencies. She mentioned a bill she had paid. I knew the bill was real, but the amount she quoted was $60 more than the actual amount. She was skimming. She was skimming from the household budget, sitting right across from me, and she said the number with the same casual confidence she said everything. And I nodded and said thanks for handling that. And she smiled, and I smiled back. And my face felt like a mask, made of something rigid, plaster or clay. And I could feel the muscles straining to hold the shape. The phone call was worse. A Wednesday evening. Vivian was in the spare room with the door closed, and I walked past and heard her talking in a voice I had never heard her use, low and fast. And she was saying something about a closing date and a transfer, and a name I did not recognize. I stopped in the hallway. I controlled my breathing. I counted to 4 on the inhale and 6 on the exhale the way I do when a load is missing, and dispatch is screaming and I need to think clearly. She said the name again, and then she laughed, a small laugh, private and pleased. And I heard her say, "He does not suspect a thing." Those words, "He does not suspect a thing," spoken about me, in my house, while I stood 6 feet away on the other side of a hollow corridor. And I pressed my palm flat against the wall and felt the paint under my fingers. And I did not make a sound. I walked back to the kitchen and I opened the refrigerator and I stood there staring at the shelves until my pulse came down. When she emerged 10 minutes later, she said she had been on the phone with a friend from church. And I said, "That is nice." And she said, "Yes, it is." And we stood in the kitchen and The distance between what she said and what was true was an ocean, and I stood on my side of it and smiled. The almost caught moment came on a Saturday. I had been on the county property records website on my laptop, tracing a deed modification, and I left the browser open when I went to check on the kids. Vivian found it. She was standing at the kitchen counter with my laptop open in front of her, and her face was doing something I had never seen. A rapid calculation behind the eyes. The same look dispatch gets when a driver calls in a mechanical failure, and you are running the numbers on what it will cost. She looked at me and she said, "What were you looking at?" And I felt the blood leave my hands. I said, "I was checking my own deed." "The house," I said. "I was looking at my own property records because I want to refinance." She held my gaze for 4 seconds. I counted them. 4 seconds of her searching my face for the thing that would tell her I knew, and I gave her nothing. I gave her the face of a tired freight dispatcher who was thinking about interest rates. She closed the laptop and said, "That is smart. You should refinance while rates are good." And she walked away. And I went into the bathroom and gripped the edge of the sink and stared at myself in the mirror, and my hands were shaking so badly the sink was vibrating. My neighbor Dwight saved me from confronting too early. Dwight Hollis, 71 years old, retired postal worker, lived in the brick ranch next door for 30 years. He sat on his front porch every afternoon with a glass of sweet tea and watched the street with the attention of a man who had spent his career reading addresses and tracking packages. I went to him because I needed a witness. I needed someone who had seen things from the outside. I showed him the forged signatures on the property transfers. Dwight went quiet. Not the quiet of disinterest, the quiet of recognition. He said, "My father lost his house the same way." Then he said, "I will testify to what I saw her carrying out of your mailbox." He told me he had seen Vivian on multiple occasions removing bundles of mail from my box before I got home from work. He had thought it was normal, a family member getting the mail. But the volume, he said, was unusual, armloads sometimes, and always on Thursdays, which was when the county tax statements and the bank correspondence arrived. Dwight did something else. He stopped me from going inside my house and detonating everything on a night when I was close to breaking. I was standing on my front porch with the dossier in my hand, 40 pages by then, and I was breathing fast, and I could feel the confrontation building in my chest like pressure. In a pipe, and Dwight called over from his porch. He said, "Marcus, come sit down." I went over. He poured me tea. He said, "You have enough to end her. Do not give her the chance to run. Do not give her the chance to burn the documents. Do not give her the chance to call you crazy and turn the family against you. Take it to the people whose job it is. Let the system do what the system does." And he was right. Dwight was right. And I hated that he was right because I wanted to walk into my kitchen and put those 40 pages on the table and watch her face collapse. But Dwight had watched his father lose a house because his father confronted instead of filing, and the lesson cost him a childhood. And he gave it to me for free. The villain charm offensive came next, as if Vivian sensed something in the atmosphere and tried to neutralize it. She organized a birthday party for Amara. She decorated the kitchen with streamers. She baked a cake from scratch, 3 layers. Buttercream frosting. She stood next to the table and held Amara and cried about missing Ronald. She said he would have loved to see her turn 10, and the tears were perfect. The voice cracked in the right place. The hands trembled, and for 2 days I hesitated. For 2 days the dispatcher in me went quiet, and the brother-in-law, who had made a promise, stood in his place. And I thought, what if I am wrong? What if there is an explanation? What if the properties were something Ronald set up, and Vivian was just managing them? And the signatures were authorized somehow, and the tax returns were a mistake, and the investment account was something she was holding for the children. Then Kayla came into the kitchen on a Tuesday evening and slid her phone across the table. She was 19 by then, home from community college for the week. She did not say anything. She just slid the phone. On the screen was a screenshot from Vivian's private Instagram account, an account I did not know existed, and it showed photographs of a luxury condo in Savannah. White walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, a balcony overlooking a marsh. The caption read, "Finally free of the charity case family." The date on the post was 3 days after I had co-signed Vivian's car loan. I looked at my daughter. My daughter looked back at me, and she said, "Dad, I have been trying to tell you." The last piece arrived from Arthur Phelps, the forensic accountant. A complete accounting. Total assets Ronald left behind. $310,000 across the properties, the investment account, and the insurance payout. Total amount Vivian had moved into her own name or spent $287,000. Total amount Marcus Pemberton had spent from his own retirement and earnings, believing the family had nothing. $61,000 including the 401k withdrawal, the funeral, and various expenses Vivian had claimed were necessary. Total tax liability created in Marcus Pemberton's name through fraudulent dependent filings, $14,000 owed to the IRS, or ERS by a man who had never owed the IRS a dime. I printed the final report. I added it to the dossier. I sat in my truck in the Pilot Station parking lot at 11 o'clock at night, and I held the folder on my lap, and it weighed perhaps 2 pounds, 46 pages. Property records, certified copies of forged documents, bank statements, tax filings, the forensic accountant's report, printouts of the Instagram posts Kayla had captured, Dwight's signed statement about the mail, and a timeline, 3 pages long, cross-referencing every lie Vivian told with the documented truth on the corresponding date. I held Ronald's watch. I had taken it from the hospital bag the day he died. It was a Seiko, silver with a blue face. Nothing expensive, but Ronald wore it every day, and the crystal had a scratch from where he caught it on a truck tailgate years ago. I had kept it on my dresser since the funeral. I held it in the truck and I felt the weight of it, the specific weight of my brother's daily life on my wrist. And I thought about the man who had been smarter with money than anyone knew, and who had built something real and quiet and lasting. And I thought about the woman he married. And I set the watch on the passenger seat. And I drove home, and I did not sleep. And in the morning, I put on a clean shirt, and I drove to the county courthouse. I did not confront Vivian. I need you to understand that. I know some of you listening want the scene where I slam the folder on the table and watch her face crumble. I wanted that scene too. I wanted it so badly that the desire was physical, a taste in my mouth like copper. But Dwight was right. Confrontation gives the guilty party options. It gives them time to call a lawyer, to hide assets, to shape a story, to cry and deflect and make you the aggressor. What I did instead was walk into the Dougherty County District Attorney's Office, Financial Crimes Unit, at 8:15 on a Tuesday morning. And I hand-delivered 46 pages of evidence to a woman named Assistant DA Lorraine Hackett. I sat in a chair across from her desk and I watched her read. She did not look up for 20 minutes. When she did, she picked up her phone and called someone and said, "I need you to see this now." The fluorescent light in that office had a faint buzz, a thin electrical hum that I could feel in my teeth. And I sat there listening to it while she turned pages. And I realized that I had not unclenched my jaw in 3 hours. I pressed my fingers into the muscles below my ears, the way I had learned to do in the truck. And I waited, and the hum continued. And I watched Lorraine Hackett's pen move down margins, making small, precise marks next to the entries that mattered most. Then I drove to the post office, and I mailed a duplicate of the dossier to the IRS. Fraud hotline. Certified mail. Return receipt requested. I have the receipt. I still have it. It is in a drawer in my kitchen. The postal clerk weighed the envelope on a steel scale, and it came to 1 pound 14 ounces. And she asked if I wanted insurance on it. And I said yes, and I insured 46 pages of paper for $500. And she looked at me, and she did not ask why, and I was grateful for that. Then I drove home. I pulled into the driveway. The porch light was on. even though it was midday. Vivian always left it on. A small thing. The kind of detail you file away without meaning to. I walked inside. Vivian was in the kitchen making the kids' lunches. She asked if I wanted a sandwich. I said no. Thank you. I went to my room. I sat on the bed. I held Ronald's watch. The second hand was still moving. I had kept it wound out of habit, turning the crown each morning the way Ronald must have done. And I sat there and watched the hand sweep around the dial, and I counted the seconds, and each one felt like a brick being laid in a wall between the life I had been living and the one that was about to begin. And I waited. The waiting lasted 11 days. 11 days of eating dinner across from her. 11 days of hearing her voice on the phone behind the closed door. 11 days of watching her hands. Those practiced hands. Butter a piece of bread, or fold a towel, or wipe a counter. Ordinary domestic motions performed by hands that had signed a dead man's name 14 times. I noticed things during those 11 days that I had never noticed. The way she held a pen, low on the barrel with pressure. The way she turned envelopes face down on the counter before opening them. A small concealment so natural it looked like habit. The way she checked her phone under the table during dinner. Quick downward glances. The screen casting a blue-white light on the underside of her chin. On the 12th day, at 7 a.m, there was a knock at my front door. The knock had weight. Not a neighbor's knock, not a delivery. An institutional knock, 3 measured beats with authority behind it. I was already dressed. I'd been dressed and sitting at the kitchen table since 5:30 with a cup of coffee I did not drink. The coffee had gone cold, and a film had formed on the surface, and the kitchen was quiet, except for the refrigerator compressor cycling on and off. Vivian was in the kitchen feeding the children. Jalen was eating cereal. The spoon clinked against the bowl in a steady rhythm. Amara was drawing something on a napkin, her pencil moving in small circles, her tongue pressed to the corner of her mouth, the way children concentrate. The morning light was coming through the window over the sink, and it made the kitchen look warm and ordinary. And I remember thinking that this was the last morning this room would feel like this. The last morning before the architecture of the lie met the architecture of the truth. A mockingbird was singing in the crepe myrtle outside the window. I remember the bird because it did not stop singing through any of what came next. I opened the door. 2 investigators. One from the DA's Financial Crimes Unit, a man in a gray suit with a county badge on his belt. His shoes were polished to a high shine, and I noticed that because I was looking down when I opened the door, my hand on the knob, my eyes not yet ready to meet anyone's. One from the IRS Criminal Investigations Division. A woman in a navy blazer with credentials in a leather fold. She had a manila folder under her arm that was thicker than mine. They asked for Vivian Pemberton. I stepped aside. The hallway was narrow, and I pressed my back against the wall to let them pass, and I smelled coffee on the man's breath and something clean like starch from the woman's blazer. Vivian came out of the kitchen with a dish towel over her shoulder, and her face was already calibrating, already reading the room, the way I had watched her read rooms for 2 years, scanning for the emotional temperature, adjusting her expression to match what was needed. And I watched the exact moment she understood. It was not instant. It happened in layers. First confusion, a slight narrowing of the eyes, the face you make when someone knocks at a time you do not expect. Then concern, the chin pulling back slightly, the body straightening. Then a flicker, just a flicker of recognition, her gaze landing on the folder under the woman's arm, and then moving to my face and finding nothing there, and moving back to the folder. And then something I had never seen in her face in 2 years of living under the same roof. Fear. Not the performed fear she used when she cried. Real fear. The kind that starts behind the eyes and spreads downward through the jaw and the throat and the hands. Her fingers went to the dish towel on her shoulder and gripped it, and the knuckles whitened. I saw the tendons in her wrist stand out like cables. The investigator from the DA's office said her name and handed her a document and began speaking in a measured, professional tone. And I stood in my living room, and I listened to words I had been carrying for weeks, finally spoken aloud by someone with the authority to make the matter, fraud, forgery, identity theft, tax evasion, property theft. Each word landing in the kitchen like a stone dropped into still water. The investigator's voice was flat and unhurried. He read from a prepared statement. The cadence reminded me of the way dispatch reads a manifest item by item. No inflection, just the inventory of what is there and what is missing. Vivian looked at me. She looked at me the way a person looks at the ground when it opens up beneath them, searching for something solid, something familiar. She said, "Marcus, what is this?" Her voice was steady, still performing, still reaching for the version of herself that could explain anything away. The dish towel was sliding off her shoulder, and she caught it and held it against her chest like a compress, like something to stop bleeding. I said nothing. I had rehearsed this. I had planned exactly what I would say, which was nothing. The evidence spoke. The institutions spoke. I did not need to. My silence was the loudest thing I had ever produced. The investigator asked her to sit down. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she had redirected my mail, skimmed my budget, smiled at me over pot roast, while she dismantled my brother's legacy. The chair scraped against the linoleum, and the sound was sharp and brief. Jalen was watching from the doorway. His cereal spoon was still in his hand, a drop of milk hanging from the curve of it. Amara had stopped drawing. Her pencil was frozen mid-circle on the napkin. The dish towel was still on Vivian's shoulder. They asked her about the property transfers. She said she had authority to manage Ronald's estate. The investigator produced the first forged document. He placed it on the table and turned it so the signature faced her. He pointed to the signature. He pointed to the date. He said, "Ma'am, this document was filed 4 months after Mr. Ronald Pemberton's death." She said Ronald had signed it before he died and she filed it late. The investigator produced the second document, also signed after Ronald's death, and the third, and the fourth. He laid them side by side in a row across the table, and the table began to disappear under the evidence the way a road disappears under floodwater. Each one filed after Fyodor Satasis. Each one with a date that could not have been Ronald's living hand. She stopped talking after the sixth document, her mouth closed and her jaw set, and I recognized the expression because I had worn it myself in the truck when my own jaw locked, and I could not speak. They asked about the tax filings. She said her tax preparer had made errors. The IRS investigator opened a folder and showed her the returns, the ones listing Marcus Pemberton as a dependent, the ones filed in Ronald's name, using Ronald's social security number 18 months after he was buried. She said she did not understand how that happened. The investigator said the returns were filed from an IP address registered to the P.O. box Vivian had opened. The investigator read the IP address aloud, a string of numbers that hung in the air like a combination to a lock. She said someone must have stolen her identity. The investigator asked whose handwriting was on the P.O. box application. She did not answer. The silence lasted 7 seconds. I counted. They asked about the investment account. She said she did not know Ronald had one. Arthur Phelps's forensic report was produced. The liquidation record showing the funds transferred to an account in Vivian's maiden name. The bank in Savannah. The $67,000, which she said Ronald had given her access before he died. The investigator asked for documentation of that authorization. She did not have it because it did not exist. Because Ronald had never given it. Because Ronald was dead when she forged the paperwork. The IRS investigator made a note. The pen moved across the pad with a small scratching sound, and I thought of Amara's pencil on the napkin, and how different those two sounds were. One a child drawing and one a federal agent recording the absence of an answer. The cycle continued. Evidence, lie, counter-evidence, new lie, counter. Her defenses collapsed in sequence like load-bearing walls removed one at a time from a structure that had no foundation. Denial first. Then deflection, pointing at the tax preparer, at identity thieves, at clerical errors. Then she tried anger. She stood up and the chair rocked back on two legs, and she said she was being harassed, that she was a grieving widow, that she had been taking care of children that were not hers. Her voice rose and it filled the kitchen, and Jalen flinched in the doorway, and the cereal spoon finally dropped from his hand and clattered on the floor. The IRS investigator said, "Ma'am, please sit down." Her voice was quiet and level, and it was the quietness that did it. Vivian sat down. The chair settled back onto four legs with a thud, then bargaining. She said she would pay everything back. She said it was a misunderstanding. She said she had been confused by grief. She leaned forward, and her hands were open on the table, palms up, the universal posture of supplication, and her voice found the crack it always found when she needed sympathy. The investigator produced the Instagram screenshot, the luxury condo in Savannah, the white walls, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the marsh in the background, finally free of the charity case family. Vivian stared at the printout and her mouth opened and closed, and no sound came out. The printout sat on the table between her open hands, and the distance between those words and the words she had been speaking was measurable now, documented, printed in color on standard paper, and there was nowhere left to go. The last offense was the one I had anticipated. The one I had braced for the way you brace for impact when a truck jackknifes on the interstate, and there is nothing to do but hold the wheel and let the physics play out. She turned to me, and she said, "Marcus, after everything I have done for this family, after everything I have done for those children, you would do this to me." And her eyes filled with tears, and her voice cracked, and her hands shook, and it was perfect. It was the perfect performance. And for 1/2 second, the brother-in-law in me felt the pull of it. The gravity of 2 years of habit. The muscle memory of believing her. And then I looked at her hands. And I thought about those same hands signing my brother's name to documents that erased his legacy. And I felt nothing. Nothing at all. The tears hit the table and I watched them land, and they were just water. They caught the morning light from the window, and they sat on the wood surface in small, round shapes, and they evaporated, and left nothing behind. I said one thing. I had not planned to say anything, but I said one thing. I said, "Ronald left $310,000. I buried him with my retirement money. You watched me do it. And you knew." Vivian's face went still. The performance ended. It did not fade. It stopped the way a machine stops when you pull the plug, mid-motion, abrupt. Behind the mask there was something hard and small and cornered, and it looked back at me with an expression I can only describe as the face of a person who has been living inside a construction, and the walls have just been removed, and the air is too cold, and the light is too bright. Her eyes were dry now. The tears were gone as if they had never existed. Her jaw was set. Her hands lay flat on the table, motionless. And I looked at those hands one last time, and I thought, those are the hands that practiced my brother's signature until the R was almost right. The investigators asked her to come with them. She stood slowly. She did not look at the children. She did not look at me again. She walked toward the front door, and her footsteps on the linoleum were the only sound in the house. She left the dish towel on the chair. It was draped over the back, white cotton with a red stripe, and it stayed there for 3 days before I moved it. Jalen asked where his mother was going, and I said she had to take care of some things, and he looked at me with Ronald's eyes, the same deep brown, with the same quiet steadiness. And I put my hand on his shoulder, and I held it there. because that was the only true thing I could do in that moment. Amara picked up her pencil and went back to drawing on the napkin. She drew a house with a triangular roof and a door with a round knob, and I watched her draw it, and I did not speak. Within 72 hours, her bank accounts were frozen. The rental property was seized by the county pending investigation. The IRS opened a formal case. Identity theft charges were filed alongside the fraud charges. Her own attorney, a public defender assigned, when she could not afford private counsel because her assets were frozen, advised her to take a plea. He told her the paper trail was airtight, 46 pages. He said he had never seen a civilian build a case that thorough. He used the word civilian, and I thought, I am a freight dispatcher. I track loads. This was just the biggest load I ever reconciled. Vivian tried to control the narrative. She called family members before the charges were public. She told Ronald's college friends and church members that Marcus had turned on her, that she was being persecuted, that she had only been trying to survive. The story she told was compelling. It was the story of a widow abandoned by an ungrateful brother-in-law. And for about 48 hours, it gained traction. 2 of Ronald's old friends called me, and their voices were cold. And I listened, and I said, check your email. I had sent the dossier to everyone she called. Every property record, every forged signature, every bank statement, every fraudulent tax return, the Instagram screenshots, the forensic accountant's report. The calls back were different. The voices were different. One of Ronald's friends, a man named Curtis who had been at the funeral, who had watched me write the check for the casket, called me back, and he was crying. He said, Marcus, I am sorry. I said, you did not know. He said, none of us knew. And I said, that was the point. He was quiet for a long time after that. I could hear his breathing on the line, uneven, the breathing of a man rearranging 2 years of memory. Then he said, what do you need? And I told him what I needed, which was someone to take care of Ronald's children who was not me, because I was about to spend the next year fighting the IRS to clear my own name, and I could not carry it all. And Curtis said, I am here. Vivian lost custody of Jalen and Amara. Not to me, though I offered. The court appointed Ronald's college friend Curtis as temporary guardian pending a full hearing. Curtis had a stable home in Valdosta and a wife who taught second grade and no criminal record, and 2 spare bedrooms, and a willingness to step into the space that Vivian had occupied and fill it with something real. The children moved in with Curtis. I drive to Valdosta every other Saturday. The drive is 96 miles each way. I know every gas station, every exit number, every stretch of pines along Interstate 75 South. Jalen is in 8th grade now. He runs track. He has Ronald's long stride. Amara still draws on napkins. She drew me once, sitting at the kitchen table with a folder in front of me. And she got the posture exactly right. The forward lean, the hand on the edge of the paper. And I folded that napkin and put it in my wallet, where it still is. The house on Willowbrook Drive emptied out. The spare room where Vivian had slept went quiet. I stood in the doorway of that room the morning after she left, and I smelled the faint trace of the lotion she wore, something with cocoa butter. And I opened the window and let the October air come in, and I stood there until the smell was gone. The den where Jalen had set up his bed went back to being a den. The blankets he had used were still folded on the couch, and I washed them and put them in the closet. And the act of folding those blankets was heavier than it should have been. I walked through the rooms, and I saw them differently, as if someone had changed the lighting. The kitchen table, where she had cried and lied and fed the children and been served by investigators, was just a table again. The grain of the wood was visible in a way I had not noticed before, the rings and whorls of the oak surface, a pattern that had been there all along beneath the plates and the paperwork and the tears. The hall closet she had organized so efficiently held my coats and my boots and nothing else. The mailbox at the curb received my mail, and only my mail. The first time I opened it after the redirect was canceled, and found my own bank statement inside. Addressed to me at my address, I stood at the curb and held it, and the weight of a single envelope felt like proof of something returned. I took the dossier down from the shelf where I had kept it. 46 pages in a manila folder. I sat at the kitchen table and I opened it one last time. I looked at every page, the property records, the forged signatures, the bank statements, the tax returns, the forensic report, the Instagram screenshots, the timeline. I looked at it the way you look at a map of a country you survived crossing. Then I closed the folder. I put it in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet in the den. I closed the drawer. The metal made a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Ronald's watch. I had taken it to the pawn shop on 3rd Avenue where Vivian had listed it for sale. I found the listing on her phone, a photograph she had forgotten to delete. My brother's Seiko with the scratched crystal listed for $60. $60 for a watch Ronald wore every day for 15 years. $60 for the weight of a man's daily life. I went to the shop and I told the owner the watch had been stolen from a deceased man's estate, and I showed him the death certificate, and he handed it over without a word. He set it on the glass counter and slid it toward me, and the crystal caught the overhead light, and the scratch was still there. The one from the truck tailgate. And I picked it up, and the metal was cold from the display case, and I closed my hand around it. I took it home, and I cleaned it with a soft cloth, and I put it on the dresser where it had been since the hospital, and I have not moved it since. 6 months later. A Saturday in September. The light in Albany has a quality in September that is hard to describe. Golden, but heavy. The last real warmth before the air changes. The shadows are longer than they were in July, but the heat still presses on the back of your neck, and the cicadas are loud in the trees, and the air smells like cut grass, and something faintly sweet from the pecan groves south of town. I'm on my back porch. The screen door is open. The wood of the porch rail is warm under my hands, the gray paint peeling in small curls where the sun has worked on it all summer. Through the screen, I can hear Kayla at the kitchen table helping Jalen and Amara with their homework. Curtis had dropped them off for the weekend. Kayla is 20 now, and she is studying accounting at Albany State. And she says it is because she watched me build a 46-page dossier on the kitchen table and decided that numbers are the language that liars cannot corrupt. I do not know if that is true, but I know she is good at it. I can hear her explaining fractions to Amara. Her voice is patient, in a way mine never was. I can hear Jalen's pencil scratching, the same focused rhythm his father used when he filled out paperwork at the kitchen table in Leesburg. I can hear the ice maker in the kitchen drop a load into the tray, a clatter and then silence, and then the hum of the compressor starting up again. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a house that belongs to itself again. I go inside, and I pick up Ronald's watch from the dresser. I hold it. The weight of it is the weight of everything Ronald left behind that Vivian tried to erase. The scratch on the crystal catches the light. I think about my brother, who was smarter with money than anyone knew, who built something real and quiet, and was married to a woman who took it apart the moment he could not stop her. I think about what he deserved and what he got, and I think the grief is not gone and will not be gone, and that is just the shape of things now. But the house is mine again. The kids laugh in the kitchen, and that is enough, and it is not enough. And both of those things are true at the same time. I have learned to hold them both. I pick up the watch, and I put it on my wrist. I have never worn it before. The band is too loose. Ronald had bigger wrists than me. I wear it anyway. I walk back to the porch, and I sit down, and I listen to my daughter teach my brother's children about numbers, and I think, This is what remains. Not the money that was stolen. Not the years of lies. Not the rage or the fear or the nights I could not open my jaw. What remains is the table where the homework gets done. The pencil scratching. The ice maker. The ordinary sounds of people who are here because someone decided the truth was worth more than the comfort of not knowing it. I used to believe that family loyalty meant you do not question the people you love. I was wrong. Family loyalty means you protect what is real, even when the person destroying it shares your last name. I used to believe that grief made people honest. I was wrong about that too. Grief makes people invisible. It makes the grieving person a target for anyone who knows how to perform sadness. Better than you can see through it. And I learned that the most dangerous person in your life is not the one who threatens you. It is the one who cries at your table and signs your brother's name with practiced hands and looks you in the eye and says, "Trust me," while the ink is still wet. If someone moved into your life carrying grief as a credential and you stopped questioning them because you felt guilty, you are not stupid. You were targeted. The guilt was the entry point. The promise you made was the door they walked through. And the fact that you honored your word while they dismantled your world does not make you a fool. It makes you the person who kept their promise. So let me ask you, what was the first thing they asked you to sign? According to the Federal Trade Commission, identity theft through family members or household contacts accounts for nearly 30% of all reported cases. And victims who share a household with the perpetrator take an average of 14 months longer to detect the fraud. I read that number and I thought, 731 days. I was right on schedule. This story has been told. One forged signature on a dead man's name. One watch recovered from a pawn shop listing. One kitchen table that held the lies and then held the homework. If you have ever sat across from someone and felt the distance between what they said and what was true, if you have ever loved someone who used your loyalty as a tool, tell me in the comments what you carried and how long you carried it. Subscribe if you have not already, because the next story is already waiting and it is one you are going to want to hear. Until then, take care of yourselves and take care of the truth.